My father beats up my brother who stole my wife. Cheating wife story, cheating wife. Mrs. Davis, love is not a word that can erase the damage you've caused. Your actions have spoken for themselves. This court sees no benefit in mandating counseling when the other party has denied any participation. Hey, how are you guys? Thank you so much for being here and listening to our stories. Today, let's see Alan Davis tell his story. My name is Alan Davis, and I work as a mechanical engineer for a leading automobile company. I was married to Rebecca for 5 years, a period that began with promise but ended in chaos, leaving my life and marriage in ruins. We had a son, Timothy, our bright and endlessly curious 4-year-old. I still remember the day Bill called me, his voice alive with excitement. He and Lori had bought a house in our neighborhood. We'll practically be neighbors, he said, brimming with enthusiasm. At the time, I thought it was a great idea. Timothy could spend more time with his cousins, and maybe Bill and I could reconnect, just like the old days. We drifted apart over the years, not because of any argument, but because life is a way of pulling people in different directions. At first, everything seemed perfect. Rebecca, always the thoughtful one, was overjoyed for them. They'll need help settling in, she told me one evening while we sat at the kitchen table. True to her word, she went over the very next day to lend a hand. She spent hours helping them unpack, organize, and decide where to hang their pictures. When she came home that evening, she was glowing. Lori has such a great eye for decor, she said, pulling out her phone to show me photos of their freshly arranged living room. I nodded along, happy to see her happy. But as the weeks went by, Rebecca's trips to Bill and Lori's house became more frequent. It wasn't just about helping them settle anymore. She was there almost every other day, tending to their garden, brainstorming paint colors, even babysitting their kids while Lori ran errands. At first, I kept my frustration to myself. After all, what could I say? Rebecca was just being herself. Kind, generous, always willing to help. It was one of the things I loved most about her. But as time passed, I couldn't ignore how much of her energy was being poured into their home instead of ours. One evening, I came home after a long day at work. Timothy was sitting in front of the TV, eating cereal for dinner. Rebecca wasn't home yet. She'd texted earlier, saying she was helping Bill with something and would be back later. I stood in the doorway, watching Timothy giggle at the cartoon on the screen, completely unaware of my growing frustration. I couldn't help but think, why is she over there again? It wasn't just the time she spent there. It was the way their house seemed to take precedence over ours. Our evenings together became rushed, our conversations disjointed. When she was home, her mind was still over there, talking about Lori's plans for a guest room makeover or Bill's latest DIY project. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was being unreasonable. But deep down, I knew something was off. Then came the day I'll never forget. I'd taken a rare day off to spend time with Timothy. He was curled up beside me on the couch as we watched a National Geographic documentary about chimpanzees, one of his favorite animals. The narrator spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining the complex social dynamics of the chimps. On the screen, a male chimp briefly mounted a female. It was quick, barely a moment, and nothing graphic. Still, I glanced at Timothy to see if he'd noticed. He seemed unfazed, his eyes glued to the screen with the same innocent curiosity he always had. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made my blood run cold. "That's just like Uncle Billy and Mom," he said matter-of-factly, as though he were describing a scene from one of his cartoons. I froze. My heart stopped, and my mind raced to make sense of his words. I turned to him, forcing a calm tone despite the panic rising inside me. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, trying to smile. Timothy looked up at me, his wide, innocent eyes blinking as if I'd asked why the grass was green. "2 days ago," he said cheerfully, "I saw Uncle Billy and Mom doing that." He pointed at the TV, where the chimps had now moved on to grooming one another. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Where did you see them, Tim?" I asked, my voice trembling. "At Uncle Billy's house," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I went to find Mom, but she was in the living room with Uncle Billy. Aunt Lori was there too. They were doing that." He gestured toward the TV. his small hand imitating the chimp's movements. My stomach churned, a cold dread washing over me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't want to believe it. There had to be some kind of explanation. Timothy was just a child, innocent, easily confused. Maybe he didn't understand what he had seen. Maybe he misinterpreted something. Forcing myself to stay calm, I asked again, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Tim, are you sure? What exactly were they doing?" He nodded earnestly. They were hugging really close like this. He wrapped his arms around himself in demonstration. And Uncle Billy was making funny noises. Then Aunt Lori laughed, and Mom told me to go play outside. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to stop, to tell Timothy he must have been mistaken. But I couldn't bring myself to dismiss him outright. Instead, I asked one last question, my voice barely a whisper. "Did they see you, Tim?" He shook his head. "No, I just saw them when I came inside. I don't think they saw me." I sat back on the couch, my head spinning, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. Timothy, oblivious to the weight of his words, turned his attention back to the TV. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fists, trying to make sense of it all. Rebecca, Billy, Lori. Their names swirled in my mind, tangled in the dark cloud of doubt and suspicion. Could it be true? Had I been blind to something happening right in front of me? I looked at Timothy, so innocent, so trusting. He didn't understand the magnitude of what he'd just said, but I did. And now, there was no turning back. After Timothy's revelation, I couldn't shake the thought from my mind. It gnawed at me day and night, a splinter buried deep under my skin. But I didn't confront Rebecca immediately. I didn't know how to. If I was wrong, I'd destroy our marriage over a misunderstanding. But if I was right, I didn't want to think about that. So I started paying attention. I tracked when she left the house and where she said she was going. I kept my questions casual, masking my growing paranoia as attentiveness. "Where are you off to, honey?" I'd ask lightly. "What time should I expect you back?" She never seemed suspicious of my sudden interest in her comings and goings, but patterns began to emerge. Rebecca was spending more and more time at Bill and Lori's house. Even when she didn't explicitly say she was going there, I could feel it in my gut. At home, everything felt different. I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Every time she initiated intimacy, I made excuses. "I'm tired," or "I've got a headache." The trust we once shared was gone, and the distance between us only grew. One day, I decided to act. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. My heart pounded as I drove home, a mix of dread and hope churning inside me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she'd be at home with Timothy, and I'd feel foolish for ever doubting her. But as I pulled into the driveway, the house was eerily quiet. Her car wasn't there. I stepped inside, the silence pressing down on me. "Rebecca, you home?" I called out. No answer. I knew then. I knew where she was. My legs felt like lead as I walked the short distance to Bill's house. The curtains were drawn, the place unnervingly still. I circled around to the back, my footsteps muted on the grass. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, a sliver of space that felt like an open wound. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. The faint scent of perfume hung in the air, mingled with something else, something raw, musky. I moved through the kitchen, then the dining room, following the muffled sounds in the distance. At first, I thought it might be the TV, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. Low, guttural moans filled the air, unmistakable. My stomach twisted as the realization set in. This was real. I moved forward slowly, my body on autopilot. Every nerve in my being screamed for me to turn around, to walk away, but I couldn't. I had to know. The sounds grew louder as I reached the hallway, every step heavier than the last. I stopped outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle. For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. Some part of me still clung to the desperate hope that this was all a horrible misunderstanding. But that hope crumbled as I pushed the door open. There they were. Rebecca, Bill, Lori, all of them naked, entangled on the floor in a grotesque scene that shattered everything I thought I knew about my wife, my brother, and his wife. Something inside me broke. A dam of suspicion, pain, and betrayal burst, and rage flooded through me. My fists clenched, and before I knew it, I was charging at Bill. "You son of a—" I roared, my voice raw with fury, as my fist connected with his jaw. He staggered back, yelping in pain, but I didn't stop. Another blow landed on his ribs, my anger giving me strength I didn't know I had. "Alan, stop!" Rebecca screamed, scrambling to her feet and throwing herself between us. Her frantic hands grabbed at me, but I shoved her aside, blinded by rage. Lori tried to pull me back, her hands clawing at my arm, but I swung out wildly, catching her shoulder and sending her stumbling. "You think you can betray me like this and just walk away unscathed?" I shouted, turning back to Bill. He cowered, clutching his side, trying to shield himself from the next blow. "Alan, please!" Rebecca cried again, stepping in front of him, tears streaming down her face. "Stop it! Just listen to me!" I pointed a trembling finger at her, my voice trembling with rage. "You don't get to tell me to stop. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. How could you do this?" She tried to grab my hand, her voice pleading. "Alan, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I spat, cutting her off. "I walked in on you, with my own brother. And Lori, what the hell am I supposed to think?" I stepped back, shaking my head in disbelief. My chest heaved as I struggled to process the scene in front of me. My breathing was ragged, and I felt like the walls were closing in. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. "You're going to tell me the truth. Right here, right now. If you lie to me, if you so much as hesitate, I will unleash hell on all of you." I pressed the record button and pointed the phone directly at Rebecca. "Start talking. Now!" Rebecca glanced at Bill and Lori, then back at me. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. Not anymore. "Alan," she began, her voice trembling. "Bill and Lori are their swingers. They invited me to join them a few months ago." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "And you just went along with it?" I demanded, without even talking to me, without even thinking about what this would do to our marriage. "I wanted to talk to you," she stammered, her words spilling out in a rush. "I just didn't know how. I thought you'd never understand. Bill and Lori said it could be a way for us to explore. To spice things up. Spice things up." I echoed coldly, the words dripping with contempt. "You think sneaking around behind my back and betraying me is spicing things up?" Rebecca wiped at her face, but I didn't care. I turned to Lori, who had the audacity to speak up. "Alan, this isn't as big a deal as you're making it out to be," she said, her tone defensive. "People have open relationships all the time. It's not like—" "Shut up," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear a damn word from you." I turned back to Rebecca, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Is this what you wanted? For me to walk in on this circus? Did you even think about Timothy? What kind of example are you setting for our son?" Rebecca took a step closer, her hands outstretched. "Alan, please, I was going to tell you. I thought maybe you'd join us." "Join you?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "You're insane. All of you." I pulled my phone back, snapping pictures of the scene. The three of them still partially undressed, their faces a mixture of shame and shock. "You're going to regret this," I said, my voice low and venomous. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the house, my heart pounding and my mind racing. When I got home, I sent the pictures and video to both sets of parents, hers and mine, with a single, searing line. "This is what your daughter has been up to." Then I tore through the house, gathering Rebecca's clothes, her shoes, her bags, everything she owned, and hurled it all onto the street. I didn't care who saw. Consideration was the last thing Rebecca deserved. My head was spinning from everything that had just happened when I sat on the couch, trying to process it all. That's when my phone started blowing up. The first call was from Rebecca's father. His voice thundered through the speaker the moment I picked up. "Alan, is it true? Did that daughter of mine?" He stopped, his breathing heavy. "If you see that bitch, tell her she doesn't have parents anymore. She's dead to us. I can't believe she'd do something like this. To you, to Timothy, to all of us." I didn't know how to respond. His anger mirrored my own. but hearing it from him made the whole situation feel even more real. I managed a quick, "I'll let her know," before hanging up. The next call came seconds later. This time it was my father. His voice was cold, clipped, filled with a fury I'd rarely heard from him. "Alan, I just got off the phone with Billy. I told him he's disowned. He's no son of mine. I told him to pack his things and leave the city tonight, to run to parts unknown before I find him and kill him with my own hands. He's a disgrace to this family." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. "Dad, I began, but he cut me off. Listen to me, Alan. File for divorce. File a restraining order if you have to. Save Timothy from that woman. She's not fit to be a mother. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, Dad," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. "Good. Stay strong, son. You didn't deserve this." The call ended, and I sat in silence, the words from both fathers echoing in my mind. But I didn't have long to think. Within minutes, a loud, frantic banging erupted at the front door. "Alan," Rebecca's shrill voice pierced through. "Open this door right now." I froze, my stomach twisting. Then I heard Bill's voice, deep and menacing. "You think you can humiliate us like that? Open the damn door." The pounding grew louder, more violent. Against my better judgment, I got up and opened it. The moment the door swung open, Bill lunged at me, a wooden bat in his hand. "You bastard," he roared, slamming the bat against the side of my head. Pain exploded through my skull, and I stumbled back, barely catching myself against the wall. Before I could react, the three of them were on me. Lori clawed at my face, her nails biting into my skin, while Rebecca screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "How dare you refuse us? How dare you send that video to our parents?" Bill swung the bat again, this time striking my shoulder. "You think you're better than us? You think you can just ruin our lives?" he snarled. I tried to shield myself, but the blows kept coming. Lori kicked at my legs while Rebecca slapped me repeatedly, her words a vicious mix of rage and betrayal. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You're a selfish, pathetic excuse for a man." I was on the ground now, curled up, trying to protect my head. But then, through the chaos, a voice rang out from outside. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" It was my neighbor, Mr. Carter, and he wasn't alone. He'd brought 3 other men, and they were rushing toward the house. Bill barely had time to react before Mr. Carter tackled him, wrestling the bat from his hands. One of the men grabbed Lori, pulling her away from me, while another restrained Rebecca. The 3 of them yelled, cursed, and thrashed, but they were no match for the men who'd come to my rescue. "Call the cops!" Mr. Carter barked. "I already did," one of the others replied, holding Rebecca in a firm grip as she spat and screamed. I lay on the floor, dazed and in pain, as the sounds of sirens drew closer. The trio grew quieter, their shouts tapering off as they realized they'd been caught red-handed. At the hospital, the throbbing pain in my head and shoulder was nearly unbearable. I could barely move without wincing. As the doctors treated my wounds, a police officer entered the room. He was a stern man with graying hair who introduced himself as Officer Grant. "Mr. Davis," he began, "we've arrested the 3 individuals involved in the assault. However, I need to inform you that they've also filed charges against you for battery." My heart sank. "What?" I said, struggling to sit up. "They broke into my house, attacked me, and now they're claiming I attacked them?" Officer Grant nodded, his expression grim. "That's correct. Based on the injuries they sustained during the altercation, they've filed a complaint. Unfortunately, this means we'll have to process you for battery charges as well." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "They're the ones who—" I stopped myself, forcing a deep breath. "Fine, I'll deal with it, but they're not getting away with this." After the hospital cleared me for release, I was taken to the station. The sterile walls and cold air did nothing to calm my nerves. I made the necessary phone call as soon as I was able. "Mr. Parker, it's Alan," I said as my lawyer picked up. "Alan, I've heard. I'm already on it," he replied firmly. "Stay calm. I'll have you out of there as soon as possible." "Thanks," I muttered. "And once this is over, I want to start divorce proceedings." I also need restraining orders against all three of them. Rebecca, Bill, and Lori. You got it, Parker assured me. I'll take care of everything. Sit tight. It wasn't long before Parker arrived, his sharp suit and confident demeanor a calming presence in the chaos. He quickly secured my release on bail, and I was finally able to go home, though it no longer felt like home. 2 days later, Rebecca was served with divorce papers and restraining orders while still in jail. Parker made sure it was swift and efficient. The police informed me that the case would go before a judge, which filled me with a mix of dread and anticipation. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was silent as Judge Reynolds, an older man with an imposing air of authority, took his seat. Known for his unwavering Christian values, Parker assured me he would take a hard stance against the trio. The prosecutor presented the video I had recorded during the confrontation. Judge Reynolds watched without interruption, his expression growing darker with every passing second. When the footage ended, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. An abomination, he declared, his voice cold and commanding. He turned his piercing gaze to Rebecca, Bill, and Lori, who stood before him looking sheepish and uncomfortable. You three are a disgrace to society, the judge continued. Your behavior is a betrayal of the sanctity of marriage and a blight on family values. To act with such malice and violence on top of it is abhorrent. It will not be tolerated. Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand sharply. Do not interrupt me. You will have your turn to speak if I deem it necessary. He then turned his attention to me. Mr. Davis, while I do not condone acts of violence, it is clear your actions were provoked. However, as the complainant, you must decide whether to proceed with your charges against the defendants or come to an agreement to settle this matter outside of court. Parker leaned over and whispered, Alan, this is your chance to put this behind you. Dropping the charges will speed up your divorce and help with custody arrangements for Timothy. I nodded slowly and stood. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, I am willing to withdraw my complaint of battery against the defendants if it means resolving this matter quickly and moving on with my life. Judge Reynolds gave a curt nod. Very well. In the interest of justice and expediency, I will accept this arrangement. The defendants will be released without further charges, but let it be known that their behavior has been noted by this court. They will face the consequences of their actions in the divorce and custody proceedings. The divorce proceedings began 3 months later. Rebecca arrived wearing a modest black dress, clearly chosen to elicit sympathy. She sat on one side of the courtroom, her lawyer, a stern, calculating older man, beside her. I sat on the other side, the weight of Timothy's future heavy on my mind. Parker had prepared me well, and I felt ready. Judge Jones, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, especially in cases of betrayal and negligence, entered the room. Her commanding presence silenced everyone as she took her seat, and I braced myself for what was to come. Rebecca's lawyer was the first to speak. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Rebecca Davis, would like to express her deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledges the hurt and harm she has caused her husband and her family and is seeking reconciliation. She believes that counseling could help repair this marriage and save their family. Rebecca stood up, her voice trembling slightly as she added, Your Honor, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I was forced into a situation I couldn't control. Bill and Lori manipulated me. They blackmailed me. I never wanted any of this to happen. Judge Jones raised an eyebrow, her expression stern. Blackmail, Mrs. Davis? Those are serious accusations. Do you have any evidence to support your claims? Rebecca hesitated, looking down at her hands. No, Your Honor, she admitted softly. Then why should this court entertain such allegations? Judge Jones asked, her tone icy. Without evidence, your claims carry no weight. Let's move on. Rebecca's lawyer quickly jumped in. Your Honor, while my client may not have evidence, her willingness to admit her mistakes and seek counseling demonstrates her commitment to making amends. She wants to save this marriage for the sake of their son. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up, my voice firm but controlled. Your Honor, I appreciate the attempt at reconciliation, but I've made my position clear. Rebecca's actions weren't just mistakes. They were conscious choices. Choices that endangered our family and exposed our son to situations no child should ever witness. Counseling isn't going to undo what she did or rebuild the trust she destroyed. Judge Jones looked at me thoughtfully before turning back to Rebecca. Mrs. Davis, your husband has explicitly stated that he does not wish to continue this marriage. Furthermore, your actions have spoken louder than any words in this courtroom. You engaged in behavior that not only betrayed your spouse, but also endangered your son's emotional well-being. And now, you expect this court to force Mr. Davis into counseling he does not wish to participate in? That is not how this works. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched at her lawyer's arm as if for support. "Please, Your Honor," she said, her voice breaking. "I love my husband. I love my family. I'll do whatever it takes." Judge Jones shook her head firmly. "Mrs. Davis, love is not a word that can erase the damage you've caused. Your actions have spoken for themselves. This court sees no benefit in mandating counseling when the other party has denied any participation." As the judge prepared to announce her decision, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Rebecca sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly together, while I focused on the floor, avoiding her gaze. Judge Jones's voice cut through the silence, firm and authoritative. After considering all evidence presented and the testimonies provided, this court grants the petition for divorce filed by Mr. Alan Davis. "The dissolution of this marriage is final," she declared, pausing to allow the weight of her words to sink in. "As part of the settlement, Mr. Davis will pay Mrs. Davis a modest alimony, reflective of the duration of the marriage and her current financial needs. Additionally, a portion of Mr. Davis's stock portfolio will be transferred to Mrs. Davis as agreed upon during mediation." Rebecca let out a barely audible gasp, her lips trembling, but the judge wasn't done. Regarding the custody of Timothy Davis, Judge Jones continued, her gaze now fixated on Rebecca. "This court finds that Mrs. Davis's recent actions demonstrate a lack of judgment and accountability. The welfare and emotional stability of the child must be the highest priority. As such, full custody is awarded to Mr. Alan Davis. Mrs. Davis is granted supervised visitation rights to be reviewed after 6 months, contingent upon her proving herself capable of providing a safe and supportive environment for her son." Rebecca's face crumpled and tears began to stream down her cheeks. She whispered to her lawyer, but he shook his head, indicating that there was little more to be done. I exhaled deeply, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. Judge Jones closed her folder with a sharp snap and looked at Rebecca one final time. "Mrs. Davis, I suggest you use this opportunity to reflect on your actions and how they've impacted not just your husband but your child." Court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and I stood, ready to leave. As I made my way to the door, Rebecca called out to me. "Alan," she said, her voice raw and desperate. "Please, can we talk?" I stopped, but didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say, Rebecca. You made your choices." She hurried over, ignoring the murmurs of those still in the room. "Alan, I made a mistake. I know I messed up, but please, we can fix this. For Tim, for us." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "Fix this? Rebecca, you destroyed everything. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Tim, you hurt our family. There's no going back from this. I don't want to talk to you. Not now, not ever." Her tears intensified, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I hope you choke on your own spit and die," I said firmly, then turned and walked away without looking back. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca's calls and messages dwindled. She had no choice but to accept the terms of the divorce. Once the alimony and stock transfer were finalized, she packed up her things and left town quietly. Neighbors whispered about her departure, but I didn't care. My focus was on rebuilding my life with Timothy. She was gone, and so was the chaos she brought into our lives. A few weeks after the dust settled, my father paid an unannounced visit. Timothy's face lit up with joy at the sight of his grandfather, and they spent some time playing together in the living room. After a while, Dad turned to me with that familiar, serious glint in his eye. "Got any whiskey, Alan?" he asked casually. Of course, I replied, fetching a bottle and 2 glasses. Dad rarely drank, but when he did, it usually meant he had something on his mind. I poured us both a glass and handed him one as he settled into the armchair, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. "I'm here to see my grandson," he said, taking a sip, "but I've also got some unfinished business in this neighborhood." He leaned back, fixing me with a look. "Is that sorry excuse of a brother of yours still living around here?" I nodded, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Yeah, he's still here. I've been keeping my distance, though. Don't want any more drama." Dad chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Well, he won't be for long." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" He simply smiled a knowing, almost sinister grin, and took another sip of his whiskey. "Let's just say some people need to learn the hard way what it means to betray family." I didn't press him for details, but over the next few days, things began to happen. The first incident occurred when Bill's car, a shiny SUV he was always so proud of, was torched outside a bar one night. Flames engulfed it completely, reducing it to a charred skeleton. Word spread quickly, and I heard about it the next morning from a neighbor. "Did you hear about Bill's car?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Burned to a crisp outside O'Malley's. No one saw who did it." I nodded, hiding a smirk. Dad wasn't one to make empty threats. 3 days later, Bill was attacked. He'd been walking to his car when a large man, unknown to anyone in the neighborhood, jumped him. The assault left Bill with a black eye, a split lip, 3 cracked ribs, and a ruptured testicle. When I heard about it, I couldn't help but remember Dad's words. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Bill's dog, a mutt named Rusty, went missing. Lori was frantic, posting signs and asking neighbors if they'd seen him. But the next morning, Bill received a package on his doorstep. Inside was a blood-soaked dog collar. Lori screamed when she saw it, and Bill turned pale, holding the collar with trembling hands. Later, I learned from Dad that Rusty was alive and well, happily staying at my father's property out in the country. The dog never liked Bill anyway, Dad said with a grin when he called to give me the update. He's much better off now. The collar incident was the final straw for Bill and Lori. The fear and paranoia became too much for them to handle. Lori broke down in tears, begging Bill to leave. One evening, I noticed a moving truck parked outside Bill and Lori's house. By nightfall, they were gone. The next weekend, Dad stopped by, looking as smug as ever. "Told you he wouldn't be around for long," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Sometimes, Alan, people need a reminder of what it means to cross the wrong person, family or not." A year passed, and while the pain of everything that happened with Rebecca and Bill lingered, I had found a way to move forward. Tim had been my anchor through it all. His smile, his laughter, and his boundless curiosity gave me the strength to rebuild my life, and I was grateful for the bond we shared. That's when Kelly entered our lives. She was Tim's teacher, kind, patient, and so much more than just an educator. I met her during a parent-teacher conference and was immediately struck by her warmth. Over time, our conversations grew during school events, and I discovered she had a depth that matched her kindness. Kelly had lost her husband, a police officer, in a shootout a few years before. When she spoke of him, it wasn't with sadness, but with a deep respect and enduring love. It was clear that she had cherished him, and yet she wasn't trapped in her grief. She had learned to move forward, to live and love again. We began spending more time together, initially as friends, but there was always a spark. Tim adored her too. He'd come home from school, excitedly recounting stories that always ended with something Miss Kelly had taught him or how kind she'd been. He adored her in the innocent, wholehearted way only a child could. I think, in his own way, he sensed that she was someone special, someone who could bring light and stability back into our lives. One evening, after a quiet dinner and a long walk through the park, I found myself holding Kelly's hand. I looked at her, filled with admiration and a growing sense of certainty. I knew, without a doubt, that this was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. It wasn't a grand proposal, but it came straight from the heart. Under the gentle glow of the evening, I asked her if she would marry me, if she would become part of our little family. Kelly looked at me, her eyes shining with a mix of surprise and joy. Then, with a soft smile, she said yes. When I told him the news, his reaction was priceless. His face lit up brighter than a Christmas tree, and without missing a beat, he ran to school the next morning and announced to his entire class, "Miss Kelly is going to be my mom now." The room erupted in applause, and even Kelly couldn't hold back the happy tears welling in her eyes. Dear listeners, what are your thoughts on this journey? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.